Hi, I'm Joyce Harper, and I want to welcome you to season 4 of my podcast, Why Didn't Anyone Tell Me This? Together with expert guests and those with lived experiences, we will give you some tools to empower you to live a life of good health and happiness. Welcome to this episode where I'm going to be in conversation with Jo Baynham about relax and reset, breathwork, cold plunges and saunas. And this is in the mini-series about ways to improve your mental health. And the ideas that we discuss will certainly help you do that. Jo is a breathwork teacher, Wim Hof method certified instructor and assistant freediving coach. And I met Jo many years ago at one of the lakes that I swim at, and I've been watching him do his breathwork classes and cold dips. And I've also loved being in his sauna a few times. Today, we're going to discuss all of these topics. I love cold dips and saunas. I've become quite obsessed with them over the last few years, but I do need to do more on breath work. And it's such a powerful tool to calm our busy minds, especially for those with ADHD. And Jo has made me realize that I shouldn't be lying down when I meditate. So I've taken away quite a lot from this podcast, and I hope you do too. Enjoy. Hi, Jo.
Hi, Joyce. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
I'm really looking forward to our discussion today because it's all things that I absolutely love doing to relax. So, Jo, let's start off. Can you tell us how you first discovered breathwork, cold plunges, and saunas, and what actually drew you to these practices?
Yeah, it's quite a mix there, isn't it? I suppose, like a lot of people that I think work in this sort of industry, it's, you know, a lot of it was to do with where I was at a certain time in my life. So I was working in London at the time, before COVID, and I experienced a burnout ultimately. And um, on my sort of journey to try and feel like me again, feel more normal, and to recover from that burnout, I started to explore things like mindfulness practice and meditation. And someone recommended to me the Wim Hof method, which is a very specific form of wellness tool which combines conscious breathing or breath work with mindset training and gradual cold exposure. So that could be ice baths or it could be cold showers. And ultimately, that led me down a route where I ended up training with Wim Hof in Poland on his winter expedition as a participant. And it was absolutely life changing, incredible experience. And I knew then that I wanted to become an instructor in the method to share it with others because I found it so beneficial for myself. And then my interest in breathwork really started to expand from there. And I ended up going to Dublin and continuing my training for a couple of years in many different forms of breath work. And that's the thing with the Wim Hof method. It's a fantastic tool, but it's a tool. And for some people, the breath work they don't get on with, or it's not safe for them, or not suitable for their particular needs. So I wanted to try other styles of breath work that would be more accessible, or used in ways that some people may not be able to use the Wim Hof method. And then I was having a diving trip. I was actually diving in Iceland, so the water was about 2 degrees, free diving, and I happened to be in a group with a Finnish guy, and he led me in my first ever sauna ritual, and that's where it all clicked. That's where I realized that, to be honest with you, the sauna experience was literally spiritual, tying in all aspects of nature in a way that I had never experienced before. And that really got me into sauna. And I had been teaching the Wim Hof method at Mobile, with a mobile ice bath. So I'd travel around and do workshops. And I realized that tying in sauna into that practice would be a really lovely way to extend that wellness tool and to add um, sort of a contrast therapy to the ice baths and the breath work that I was teaching.
I so agree with you. So I've been doing the cold water swimming for a while, but through people like you, take a more consideration of the breath work, and last year especially the saunas. It's so people may listen to this and think, what how are you going to put these three things together? But I totally agree with you.
Yeah,
They really do go together, don't they?
they do. Yeah, they're a really, really lovely complementary mix.
Before we go into each of them, we're going to go through each of them in a bit more detail, starting with the breathwork. But
Yeah,
actually, can you tell everyone your setup? Because you've got this most beautiful sauna that I've been lucky enough to be in a few times. How does your setup work? What's your ideal session that you would do with somebody to take them on this journey?
yeah. So there's different ways that you could do it. So the Wim Hof method specifically doesn't really involve sauna. That's very specifically a special type of breath work combined with mindset training and with the cold exposure. So the ice bath experience tends to be the really big highlight for people overcoming that challenge. But in addition to those sort of more structured workshops, I run the Coggeshall Community Dipping Group. So we're a bunch of wild swimmers or wild dippers who meet obviously down at our local lake, which happens to be Gosfield Lake, although we do trips elsewhere as well. And every Thursday evening, we meet at a place called Sparrows Campsite in Housestead. And that's really where we focus on what I would call genuine ice baths. So not just dipping in nature, but we buy the ice in bulk, and we have a horse box trailer which has been converted into a Finnish style sauna. So all of the fittings are Finnish grade, commercial grade stoves and handmade in wood on the inside. And we would spend probably on a Thursday, we spend a minimum of 2 hours of ultimately socializing, really coming together as a community. And we would go from our cold exposure into the sauna and back again. We have a little fire pit going. We often have vegan treats, homemade treats, and hot chocolates, and it's a very social, loosey goosey experience. I try not to be too structured with it. And what I particularly love about our sessions is that when we go into the world of dipping, particularly with ice baths, it can very easily become very prescriptive and very structured, almost too structured. People get very into the numbers of how cold is it today, therefore how long am I going to do in it. And what I really try to encourage in our own community sessions, but also more widely, even if you don't come and join a group session, if you're practicing at home, is to really have fun with playing around with what the experience actually feels like and why, your why for why you're there. And in the case of Sparrows, where we have two tubs, and we have one that we fill up with ice, as I mentioned, but we have one that is just tap water. And depending on the time of year, that just tap water is still a huge challenge for people. So I like to give people the opportunity to explore what cold exposure really means on a on an experiential level. I mean, removing your mind from the focus of just the ice being at 2 degrees or 1 degrees or 3 degrees, but how do I feel today? What's my body saying? Do I want to do the ice today, or am I better off with something that's a little bit less cold enough to get the benefits without being extreme? And maybe today I've come along and there's something going on with my body or my energy levels. Maybe I've had a particularly tough week. I haven't fueled my body correctly. And in that instance, maybe I'm going to skip the dip altogether because that's okay as well. So it's so much more than just an ice bath and a sauna. It's a real exploration of the cold and exploration of these practices in a way that are meaningful for us and allows us to really start to build our connection with ourselves and not just jumping through hoops because we've heard that the cold is good. So I'm going to get my prescribed 2 minutes a day or 3 minutes a day. And also not going into the trap of going, well, I did 3 minutes last week. So this week I'm going to push for 4 minutes, and next week I'm going to push for five, and then six, and then seven, because ultimately, where does that end?
I'm so glad that we've started with this. I think it's really, really important. When I go while swimming, obviously it's normally really cold, and excuse me for swearing, but
Yeah,
almost everyone that walks past says, "What's the temperature?" And I say, "It's
yeah,
fucking cold." I mean,
yeah.
the number really doesn't matter. And if you're someone who doesn't
No,
cold water swim or cold dip, whether it's 3
yeah,
degrees or 13 degrees means nothing to you. It means something to us because we know. But I totally agree with these
yeah,
numbers. People get too obsessed. So yes, if we're in the water anywhere in winter in England, it's fucking cold.
yeah, 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 yeah. And I think, it's useful as a way of contextualizing the experience. Um, if we were to meet at the lake, I mean, what you said is more than enough. I could say to you, Joyce, how was the dip last week? And you could say, oh yeah, it was fucking cold. But you know, that would be enough. That would contain enough information to understand that you had a cold dip. But more meaningful is, how did that dip feel, Joyce? Like, what was your body doing? Like, did you find it particularly difficult? Was it particularly easy? Did it bring you a particular level of joy that day? How did the sensation of the cold on the skin feel? All of these are so much more important than just talking about numbers. Where the numbers are helpful is, firstly, I think and I say this loosely, but from a safety perspective, generally speaking, the colder the water is, the less time you're going to spend in there. So that's helpful in terms of, if you've never dipped at certain temperatures before, it's nice to know. Um, but that shouldn't be relied on. The number shouldn't be relied on. What should be relied on is how your body's feeling, and where your mindset is. And I just think that sort of information is much more useful than focusing just on those numbers, and experiencing, then using those numbers and saying, well, actually, I've had times before where people have dipped at 8 degrees and they've found it really, really challenging. And then they've had a dip the following week and it's 6 degrees and they found it really quite easy in comparison. It's so impossible to really get a huge amount of useful information from the numbers, because everything's so varied. There's so many variables to it. So it's useful for contextualizing and building your understanding of how wildly different everything is in the cold, depending on the temperatures. But beyond that, it's far more better to, I think, to be talking about the experience in general, how you slept that night, what were your energy levels like the next day. All of that's going to be, I think, much more useful than just focusing on the numbers.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I definitely know if the sun's shining, sometimes it makes me stay in a little bit longer because it's just everything's so
Yeah.
beautiful. But Joe, so I know a lot of people think that getting in cold water is their worst nightmare. They've told me it's their worst nightmare. And
Mm.
interestingly, since I've been doing more on saunas, lots of people don't like a sauna. They really don't like it for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But let's
Yeah.
start with the breath work, because
Yes.
everyone,
Yeah.
I think there's no excuse for someone not to do some breath work. So I if cold water swimming and dipping and saunas are not for you, I want everyone to stay on this bit and really listen about breath work, because I think everybody, and this podcast is going out as part of a mini series on ways to improve our mental health. We have such a
Brilliant.
crazy life now. There's, people are telling me, oh, I relax by watching TV and even reading. And I say to them, you're still getting stuff in your brain. Even reading, I know reading's relaxing, but we're still taking in
Mm.
information. And I think nowadays we just have all this information. I think what we're going to talk about today is a way of totally switching off our brain and switching it back on. But let's start with breath.
Mm.
So it's a new
Yes.
concept for many people. I know the joke was, well, we breathe all the time. Yeah, okay, but
Yeah.
you're going to tell us more about this. So, what is breath work?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you said it's a new concept. It's obviously something that's super ancient. But as a concept in modern day society, it's really had this new resurgence, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Resurgence. And so, what is breathwork? I suppose I would define it's another thing that's similar to meditation in that a lot of people have the biggest misconceptions about what meditation is. Like they'll often tell you, "Oh, it's switching off your thoughts," but it's not switching off your thoughts really. And similarly in breathwork, especially nowadays because of how kind of trendy it's become, there are a lot of people that you'll meet who feel that breathwork is this really active way of breathing where you lay down on the floor and you're breathing like really deep and heavy for like an hour, and you sort of go off to other places in your brain. And I think the danger is that then everyone thinks that that's what breathwork is, and certainly there's an aspect of breathwork under the umbrella term, but there's also lots of very, very, very gentle styles of breath work that are accessible to all, that are not going to be an intense experience, massively intense experience. And then, even at the most basic level, just raising awareness of the breath, becoming aware of the breath and how you're breathing in this moment without actively changing anything at all, I would say also comes under the umbrella term of breath work. So, as a simple definition, I would say, for my personal opinion on breathwork, how I would define it is changing the way you breathe to change how you think and feel. So, using the breath to change how you think and feel is how I would describe breathwork. And how you do that, there's 100 different ways which we can explore hopefully today.
Yeah, and as you said, you can do a simple thing, or you can do. I have done one of your hour-long workshops, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But let's look at mental health. So I really feel that this process can really help our mental health, and we've got people now with anxiety, overwhelm. You talk about burnout, stress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can breath work help?
Yes, absolutely. Um, if you go back to the oldest writings or some of the oldest writings about breath work, in some of the texts from which we get yoga from and yoga practice, which is kind of where it originates, most of it originates from pranayama practice in yoga. There's this really beautiful saying that the breath is the silken thread that ties your body and your mind. So the breath really offers an anchor, but also a way for us to connect the mind with the body. And there is this idea that where the breath goes, your mind and your body will follow. So regardless of what you're feeling physically, if you're feeling in a stressed state, if you change your breathing, that sends a signal to your body, and the body starts to soften and relax. And there's kind of a feedback loop where then your mind starts to ease as well, because it perceives that the body is softening and relaxing. So that is hugely beneficial as well. And then within the realms of breath work, obviously you have, as I mentioned, more gentle forms of breath work. So things that are recommended by the NHS, like box breathing, for example, great for reducing anxiety. They help to actually give our mind something to focus on. So in panicked situations, it's very easy for people to say, "Oh yeah, just slow your breathing down, and then you'll feel fine." Very often, the mind's gone into overactive thinking about this and that, and the body's then responding, and the breathing changes, and it reinforces that. You start to get into this panic state. What box breathing is helpful for is it gives us something to focus on. So you could pick as something as simple as a window or a book, and you can trace the outline. So already you're starting to bring your mind away from this stimulus over here that's distracting you and causing you to panic. You're redirecting the focus, and then you're getting into this pattern of breathing that signals to the body that you are safe and you're well, and it activates what we call the parasympathetic system, which is our rest or relax state, our the state of being that we're in when we're digesting and we are feeling safe. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have more active forms of breath work, like, for example, the Wim Hof method breathing or other forms of hyperventilation. And these are themselves forms of stress. They're called hormetic stress. And they have the ability to actually help us to release certain hormones. So in the Wim Hof method breathing, we have a big release of noradrenaline, and noradrenaline in the body has a number of effects, but it's typically associated with our sympathetic state. And this helps us to actually reduce inflammation in the body. We get a release of feel good hormones as well, like you find in exercise. And it helps us to better modulate things like cortisol and deal with cortisol, which is a stress hormone. So there's a whole load of different practices there that work in completely different ways, but they're all breath work, depending on what you need in what situation, obviously. And then from a particular sort of mental health perspective and the physiological effect on the brain, we know that certain styles of breath work also influence areas of our brain. So the more active forms of breathing, like controlled hyperventilation, Wim Hof method style that also uses intermittent hypoxia, that has an impact on areas of the brain such as the periaqueductal gray area, which is a very fancy term, but it's the area of the brain that's associated with feelings of connectedness, feelings of oneness. It's actually the same area of the brain that lights up when monks who have been meditating for 20 odd years sit and meditate. It's the same area of the brain is activated. There's also impacts on our endocannabinoid system. So in the Wim Hof method breathing, there was a study that was released, I believe it was 2025. I think the study took place in 2024, but it was released last year. And that was all to do on endocannabinoid receptors, so CB1. And what the science suggests is that increased CB1 receptors, so endocannabinoid receptors, an increase of those in the brain is associated with a higher tolerance to stress. So in the longer term, by doing these styles of breath work, we can actually improve our physical and mental resilience to stresses.
So you've mentioned quite a lot of physical changes as well as changes to our brain. Also, what
Yeah.
about heart rate as well? So are there any other physical heart rate? If we're anxious and stressed, our heart rate can be really. If
Yeah.
we're feeling unsafe, can be really fast. But one way to really
Yeah.
slow that, isn't it, through breath as well?
Definitely. And if you look at what we're doing with the breath work, we're playing around with our autonomic nervous system. So I mentioned the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So maybe I should just explain very briefly what that is. So we have the autonomic nervous system and we have the sympathetic branch of that, which is all to do with our fight or flight. So when things get stressful, we have a range of physiological changes in the body that help us to deal with that threat. So if we go back in evolutionary terms, way back, when we were having to be very, very physical and being prepared to run away from predators, that was really helpful because suddenly it would kick our body into action. We could start burning glucose from our fat stores, and the blood sugar levels would increase to allow us to really fuel the cells so that we could operate at our maximum. And then we evolved that obviously when the threat was gone, we could start to rest again. So suddenly now we're in a safe place. Now the body can start to shift towards a place where we are starting to digest our food. We're getting good sleep. We're repairing the cells in the body. And so ideally, we should be switching back to that parasympathetic state, that rest, relax, and digest state once the stressor has gone. Part of the issue that we face, I think, in modern day is we're not dealing with the same stresses that we were evolved to deal with. We now have pretty artificial kind of new stresses in terms of human evolution. So dealing with a shitty boss is probably something that's lasted for quite a few hundred years, or probably a few thousand if there's been a hierarchical system. But generally speaking, it's quite a modern problem. Having to deal with the stress of paying rent month after month after month, or facing being homeless is pretty new. We have bombardment from phone screens, from advertising, like total sensory stimulation all the time. So in all those periods, in my opinion, all those periods where typically we've dealt with a stressor and now we're coming back down to land and rest, we're not doing that because we're commuting, we're stuck on a train packed in with loads of people stressing out about that, and then at the same time we're listening to our phones being hit with targeted ads or messages that are designed to get an emotive reaction from us, keeping us hooked to this process. And so I think the whole way that we were designed to operate is starting to be exploited, or it's not working as we were intended to, or how we evolved to be. And what breathwork can do is help us to switch those states. So you mentioned heart rate coming down. That's typically associated when it's a fast heart rate is associated with being in stress, being in fight or flight. When we start to breathe calmly, we can start to lower that down. We enter into the parasympathetic state, or we activate the parasympathetic state. We can activate something called the vagus nerve, which runs from the brainstem all the way down into our main organs, and we can actively influence that when we breathe. So specifically with the heart rate as well, we have something called heart rate variability. So if you've got a smartwatch, or you're into tracking things at the moment, it's one of the big names that you'll see. One of the big metrics that people tend to measure now is HRV, heart rate variability, which is the time of the space between heartbeats. And HRV is associated with the balance of our nervous system. So a high HRV is generally considered a good thing. And it means that your body can switch between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic more easily. A healthy nervous system should not be stuck in one state or the other. We're flexible, we are adaptive. That's what we want. A healthily adapted system should be able to deal with a stressor when it arrives, and then go back to our rest and relax state when that stress is gone. So HRV is a good, or one of the measures of how healthy that nervous system is looking, that switch is looking. And we now know from many of the studies coming out that box breathing, coherent breathing, are two of the most beneficial ways that we can improve our HRV when it comes to breath work. They're very, very useful at doing that.
For me, everything you said is so key that breath work for me is non-negotiable now. I think everybody really should be doing it. We need to relax. We need to reset and restore our mind and our body. And I think breath work
Yeah.
is an ideal way to do that. You mentioned meditation earlier. Now, I think every meditation I've ever heard, as you say, it's not about emptying your mind. They start with breath work, and I found that if I just
Mm.
concentrate on my breathing, also if I ever, I normally am asleep within seconds, but if I ever have a problem, if I put a meditation on that's got some breath work at the beginning, I don't normally make it
Mm.
past the first couple of breaths. So how important do you think that is for
Yeah.
meditation and to help with sleep?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it starts to be this case where, how do we separate the two? Is there a blurring of lines between breathwork and meditation? Because if you want to go back to my original comment, which is about using the breath to change how we think and feel, from a very passive perspective, becoming more aware of the breath, making friends with the breath in moments where we don't change anything, which sounds a lot like using the breath as an anchor in meditation. Then we start to go into the realms of, well, actually, breath work could perhaps be considered a form of meditation, depending. There's lots of different styles of meditation. Not all meditation uses the breath as an anchor, but certain styles like Vipassana meditation, mindful awareness practices of observing, they very often use the breath as an anchor of focus. So they don't work with the breath in terms of actively changing the breathing, but they keep coming back to the breath as an anchor for your focus, for your attention. You sit, you watch the breath. Some people like to focus on the exhale or the inhale, some people on the rise and fall of the belly. They have some aspect that they start to use as their main focus. And then the mind starts to wander. Inevitably, thoughts pop up, they arise. You notice that you're thinking and you come back to the breath as an anchor. That's a real foundational aspect of certain meditation practices. But the breath work as an aspect of meditation can be very beneficial at the beginning of the meditation session. So, one of the things that I very often find in my classes, people will say to me, I tried meditation, it doesn't work for me. I can't meditate. And, I think that it's really a common thing that comes up. In my own experience, when I was first dealing with my burnout, I tried a sitting meditation and I really, really struggled. And actually, nobody said that meditation is easy. And I think people, because they think it's not forceful, that it's somehow passive, that it must therefore be an easy thing. You cross your legs, maybe hold a mudra with your hands, and then you just drift off into a Zen state. So I think there's there's that aspect that some people have. And for me, what was personally helpful was I actually started doing a guided meditation practice with someone who was doing walking meditation. So before that, I thought all meditation was sitting in stillness, in quiet, and listening to your breath or watching your breath, observing the breath. But actually, for very many people, especially given everything that we've just spoken about with being essentially addicted to our phones, always on the go, always needing stimulus, the very practice of sitting still is essential, but very, very difficult for many of us, deeply uncomfortable in some cases. Something like a walking meditation allows us to meditate with movement. And for some people, especially beginners, that can be really helpful to get them into that practice. And I know certainly for me, I did this guided walking meditation, and it was the first time I really understood what people were talking about finding the space between thoughts. I got to the end of that practice, and I thought, "Holy crap! This is what people are kind of talking about." And once I had that feeling, I could then go back and start very gradually building with sitting meditations with an awareness of kind of what it was more about without kind of writing it off and and being scared by the discomfort of it, I suppose. Where that ties into breath work is that the doing conscious breathing as a build up to our meditation practice can be amazing. You've described it yourself about that breath work has put you into such a relaxed state that ultimately you've drifted off to sleep, which this happens a lot in classes. People have got up at the end of this, I think I slept through that whole thing, and I feel, oh, I think it's kind of wasted. And I'm like, no, you're doing exactly what this session is about, which is listening to your body. Your body has been screaming at you before you came here that you need to rest. And you've just allowed yourself to go into your rest and relax state. And you've honored that. So that's absolutely brilliant. And it's a testament to your own practice that your body is responding to your breath and allowing you to rest. Whereas perhaps at that same time on a different evening, doing a different activity, you wouldn't be able to switch off. Maybe even if you were at home, you might be in a state of stress and your body's screaming at you to sleep, but you can't. So the breath work before a meditation practice, ideally, in a regular meditation practice, we don't want to keep falling asleep. So that could be an indication that the practice needs to change. If that, change up the time of day that you're doing. Maybe do the meditation practice in the morning, Some people like to do it when they're in their bed. Most people would say, get out of bed, sit down, do your meditation practice. Otherwise, you're just going to nod off to sleep. So it's it's a good thing, but there's a distinction because it comes down to why you're doing it. So on the one part, meditation could be that you are resting because you absolutely need the rest. You're finally listening to the body. This is great. You've done the breath work. You've eased off to sleep because that's your purpose for doing it. The other is that you can become a bit conditioned to these practices. If you want to have a meditation where you are conscious, it's important to make the changes to allow that to happen. But generally speaking, breath work is a really great way to focus the mind, doing some box breathing, doing some vagus breathing, to get rid of that jitteriness, the stress of the sympathetic state, get you into a nice calm place with focus, not so relaxed that you're out of it, but relaxed enough that you can still function and you have heightened focus, such as through box breathing, and then move on to the meditation practice. So it's something that can be used ahead of meditation, can also be used completely separate from meditation. That's the beauty of it. Not everyone that does breath work has to meditate. Not everyone that meditates has to do breath work. It's whatever floats your boat.
Right, there's a couple of things I'm going to unpack there. Walking meditation, I think, is a
Yeah.
beautiful idea. That's beautiful. So, everybody, after listening to this, please go and do a walking
Yeah.
meditation. Don't drive. Don't drive.
Yeah.
Don't drive and meditate. Get out in nature. I'm really trying to get everyone to get out in nature. It's free. It's there. It's outside
Yeah.
our door. So that ticks so many boxes. And Joe, I am going to listen to you because I fell asleep in your workshop. Yesterday we did a closing the bones ceremony and I fell asleep and was snoring. I do that a lot. So, and I am that terrible person that meditates in bed. Right, you've given me a
Yeah.
kick.
I mean, well, I think you do what you need to do, that works for you. What brings you your joy is going to be personal to you, and ultimately we're not monks. We don't have to sit rigid in our seats in the traditional kind of perception of what it is to meditate. And walking meditation, honestly, would be such a great thing to explore. I'll actually, maybe in the link on the description or something of this podcast, I can share with you. It's a completely free walking meditation, and perhaps any listeners that are interested can check that out. But don't don't I would say, certainly to your listeners, don't give up on the practice. It is for many people uncomfortable, to get started in. And yeah, if it's the sleep thing, define what your why is, define why it is you're doing this meditation in the first place. If it's that it helps you to get to sleep, then the breath work is going to be helpful for that. If you are consciously meditating, which I think is important to be awake for, then yeah, change a habit there, change the style of the practice. Maybe what you need is a little bit of movement in the meditation just to keep you physically there without completely switching off. But it's different for everyone.
Fantastic advice. Now, at certain stages in women's life, we experience a lot of pain. So I was specifically thinking about, actually, I was at the dentist on Friday, and before he did the injection, he said, take a deep breath, but also
Hmm.
delivering a baby. It's all about the breathing. It is really all about the breathing. And I think there's many other areas that women in their different life transitions could really make use of breath work. How have you found a difference between men and women's response to breath work?
Yeah, I think, um, firstly, I'm speaking in very general terms, so
Mm,
I don't mean to offend anyone, but I'm speaking very generally. Everyone is different. Everyone. I can speak very broadly, but obviously there's going to be exceptions to the rule. So, I would say, very generally speaking, what I tend to find is that there is a certain level of what's the word? Kind of allowing yourself to not fight something, to lean in, similar to the cold actually, that women are generally speaking really good at. Like it's a very there's almost a softness in the approach, and I don't know what that is. I don't know whether it's a intrinsically woman thing or a feminine thing, but like the ice bath experience, you cannot fight the cold. You can't. The cold will humble you. It's a great, powerful thing. All you can do is allow it to be, and allow the body to soften. And what I tend to find in the ice, as in the breathwork classes, there's an ability for women to more easily allow themselves to surrender and relax into the process in a way that perhaps many men are a bit more rigid, a bit more macho, a bit more like, yeah, I'm going in for the X amount of time and I'm going to smash this. And the whole time they're sat there like in tension. You can see it in their shoulders, you can see it in their face, and and actually that translates over to the breath work as well. There's like you can't force the breath. Everything is very soft, everything is very gentle. You just have to allow the breath to go where it actually knows where to go, but you're steering it, but you're not forcing it, you're not doing that. So my first observation I would say is there's a little bit of a difference. And of course there are many men who are very good at breath work. I say very good, that's putting a judgment on it, but they're very they're soft with the breath. They're not forcing anything, and they have a great time with it. But I'm just saying, very generally speaking, that I've noticed a bit of a difference there. I would say that as well, in terms of where the breath comes in useful, things have changed recently from a scientific perspective. As you more than anyone is aware, the science into women's health is, I mean, it's you guys have a hell of a time in the studies, in how you're represented in the studies. And this is one of the things that comes up frequently, especially now. It's very in the moment of ice baths. um, the data not representing women's bodies adequately enough, taking samples that are comprised entirely of men and blindly applying them to the entire population of women and saying that the outcome is going to be the same. This is something that we're kind of dealing with at the moment, and we're seeing a lot of. And I think that is thankfully now changing. I mean, you had that beautiful piece of research that you did looking at menopausal women dipping regularly. The study that you conducted, I think it was the questionnaire.
Yeah.
So there are people out there that are really making changes now, and there's more information going on. In terms of breath work, for menopausal women, there was a study done that looked at rhythmic breathing. It's actually, if you look at how the study was designed and the method that they used, they took a group of women who were doing practicing 15 minutes of breath work, either once a day or twice a day. And that breath work was very simply soft belly breathing to a count of about 6 breaths a minute. So I would describe that as coherent breathing. So that style of breath work that I mentioned earlier that improves your heart rate variability, although the study doesn't call it coherent breathing, that's essentially what they were doing. And what they found was, I think it was a 52% reduction in menopausal symptoms, hot flushes, anxiety, and a boost in mood for the people that were doing the breath work twice a day, 15 minutes a day. And for those that were doing it just 15 minutes a day, the once, I think it was a reduction of 47%, 42%. There wasn't a lot in it. So just 15 minutes a day. And this was a study that was conducted entirely on women. and specifically about menopause as well, which is really, really good to see.
And we can do it anytime. We can do it when we're walking, when we're sitting, when we're. Don't do it near in bed. You'll go to sleep. I will definitely go to sleep. Now, before we move on to the cold and the hot, I wanted
Yeah.
to say if we could just spend about a minute. I didn't know which one you want to pick, box breathing, but just talk us through. If we were at one of your workshops and you were going to do some box breathing with us, what would you tell us to do?
Yeah. So box breathing, firstly, I would say box breathing is one of the more simple types of breath work. It's supported by the NHS. I mentioned earlier it's used by the NHS, particularly for anxiety. It comes up for in the treatment of addiction as well, to calm the mind, focus the mind. But it's also been mentioned in women's health circles as well, specifically for menopause. Um, Now, we don't know that study that I just spoke about with the 6 breaths per minute. We don't know from that study whether those benefits are going to apply to box breathing specifically. I would strongly believe that they do apply. And even from a HRV perspective, the heart rate variability, box breathing improves heart rate variability. We know that fact. So they're working in very similar ways. But if I was to teach box breathing specifically, I would say you can do this with your eyes closed or your eyes open, whatever works best. And very simply, it's called box breathing or square breathing because we have 4 sides of a box and we're going to visualize that as we breathe. We can do that with the mind's eye, or if we struggle, very often people struggle with visualizing the box, they can find something that's square shaped in the room with them. So you could be looking at your TV or a window or the back of a book, whatever it is. That's particularly helpful in situations where we're feeling very anxious and maybe closing our eyes isn't an option, or the mind is too busy to actually even visualize anything. So there's always the option to play with the practice, but visualization is a very helpful tool. So we can start by we just breathe in for a count of 4, we hold for a count of 4, we exhale for a count of 4, and we hold for a count of 4. Now, if possible, we should do this all through the nose, and that's because the nose actually signals to the body that all is well, that all is calm. There's a load of benefits associated with nasal breathing, and it gives us more control of the breath as well. But if you can't do that, then breathing out through the mouth is fine. Breathing in through the mouth if you absolutely can't breathe in through the nose. So we start just by breathing in for 2, for 3, for 4, and hold 2, 3, 4, and out 2, 3, 4, and hold 2, 3, 4, and in, visualizing that box, 3, 4, hold 2, 3, 4, and out 2, 3, 4, and hold 2, 3, 4. And in 2, 3, 4, and holding softly and without tension 3, 4, and out 2, 3, 4, and holding softly 3, 4, and in for the last time 3, 4, and holding for the last time 3, 4, and out 2, 3, 4, and just rest here at the bottom of the breath, allowing that breath to come back to you in its own time whenever feels good, allowing the breathing to come back to its natural rhythm, whatever that is for you in this moment. And when you're ready, you can just open your eyes, come back to the space, and maybe just notice how the body feels in this moment, any changes now compared to how you were before you started the breathing. And that's our box breathing.
I definitely feel significantly more relaxed. So that's so simple. We can do that anytime we're feeling maybe nervous about something or anxious. We can just stop for that minute. One last thing, actually, it just reminded me. So
Yeah.
we always were taught to breathe. I don't know if you're not taught to breathe, but we always had this saying: breathe in if we want our waist to be. Say we're trying to put on some jeans, they say breathe in. But when you breathe
Yeah.
in, you're supposed to be filling your lungs. You're taking in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
air. You should be expanding. So how should we shouldn't be breathing like that.
No, and do you know it's really interesting because there is a phenomenon that you sometimes see in breathwork classes called reverse breathing, which is where you tell someone to breathe in, they suck the belly inwards towards the spine, exactly as you're describing, and when they breathe out, the belly actually softens and looks to expand. And it is actually it's not the correct way of breathing, um, in terms of our optimum health. Breathing in should be a nice soft full breath in the belly, and yeah, we shouldn't be sucking that belly in as we breathe in regular day-to-day breathing anyway.
Right, another piece of homework for everyone to do.
Yeah.
Right
and
now,
and
yeah,
what people could try to do with that as well, again, issues with the belly breathing and diaphragmatic breathing, proper activation of the diaphragm is something that often develops from sort of the age of 9 onwards. When kids are born, when they're babies, they have this really beautiful way of breathing. In breath work, we sometimes call it natural breathing. It's this soft belly breathing, and the breath really just lets go on the exhale. As children age, their tendons start to stiffen up, and so by the age of sort of 11 years old, you start to see. I think it starts around 9 years old. You start to see the change in the breath. The nervous system fully develops. So people start to be influenced by what's going on around them. The tendons start to stiffen up, and you actually start to see this rise in breathing, incorrect breathing issues starting from that age. And it will follow us all the way through our life because our body adapts to that way of breathing. And I've seen that with private clients. I have had 80-year-olds, 70-year-olds that have come to do a one-to-one session with me, and they literally cannot belly breathe. They're so disconnected from the use of the diaphragm. They're so used to breathing up here with the chest that our entire hour session was just to get this much movement into the belly that they could then build on every day to improve that. So it is scary how much of a impact incorrect breathing will have for us in the long run if ignored. So
yeah.
as a practice at home, people can practice this by sitting, even if they're watching TV, but consciously breathing on the belly, hands on the belly, softly breathing in through the nose, as if you're expanding a balloon into the belly. That can help. Just a few breaths, doesn't have to be a lot, just 4 or 5 breaths. Other people like to lay down on the floor. They can place a book on the belly, very soft through the nose. See if you can raise that book on the belly by breathing in. It gives you a bit of a feedback from a stimulus when you do an exercise like that. But that's a very simple technique that people can do at home just to see where in the belly they're breathing, or if indeed they're breathing there at all, if you're a chest breather.
Perfect advice. Now, let's go on to the cold first. So,
Yes.
when we get into cold water, the first advice I give anybody who is new is to regulate
Yeah.
their breathing, to slow their breathing down. I
Mm.
I would feel that hopefully everyone who I know who does research on this would say that that's so important because it's regulating the breath, but regulating the heart as well and helping you. So, tell us about the cold or ice plunges. Why do you think these are good both for our physical and our mental health?
So it goes back to that word again that I mentioned with the hyperventilation style of breath work and the hypoxia, which is hormetic stress. So the cold is an example of a hormetic stressor. Hormetic stressors are forms of stress which, in long or chronic or large, really large doses for a long time, would actually cause us significant damage, but in short or acute amounts, bring physiological adaptations that are beneficial. And we have many examples of hormetic stressors in our life. We see this with going to the gym, working out, tearing those muscles. Now, I think we've all known someone or been in the situation where we haven't built gradually to the gym. Maybe, especially this time of year, in fact, we've just got back from the new year, new me. Let's start these healthy habits. Let's go to the gym and work out like I've never worked out before. And then you're bedbound or couch
Yeah.
bound a few days later because you've overdone it. So these are examples of stressors that you build up gradually and slowly, but you must be careful not to overdo them. And the ice or cold exposure is the same. It's about putting ourselves into a stressful situation and getting the benefits of that gradually and slowly and ultimately safely. Um, but the benefits from that, there are so many from a physiological perspective. When we go into the cold, we get a huge dose of adrenaline, noradrenaline. So there was a study that was done um, that found we get a massive spike in our adrenaline levels. As I mentioned before, noradrenaline is linked to things like our immune system, and it reduces inflammation in the body in small doses, not if we're chronically, burning out our adrenal glands, but in small doses. It also has the impact of releasing other hormones in the body. So we get a boost of dopamine, our feel-good hormone. And dopamine is also linked as being the considered to be the chemical that's our reward hormone. So when we've completed a challenge, we naturally feel and feel good. That's the dopamine being released. Studies have shown that going into the ice releases 250% more dopamine just by going into the cold. And crucially, that dopamine doesn't crash when you get out. It lasts and hangs around for several hours. So it's not similar to going and doing something less healthy, like going and taking a drug that an illegal substance that boosts your dopamine in the short term, and then you have a horrific crash from it afterwards. It's not that sort of effect. And then from um, from from the adrenaline as well, as I mentioned, you have a boost in your immune system function. There's something called cold shock proteins as well, which are proteins released by the body in response to the cold. These have impacts on DNA. They are neuroprotective, so they reduce inflammation in the brain. They also help with the immune system. It's incredible. And then from a cardiovascular perspective, when we go in, we have this huge vasoconstriction. So all of our blood vessels are clamping down tightly to protect our core temperature, protect our vital organs at the expense of our peripheral limbs. But when we stay in the cold, after a little while, when things start to relax, you also get dilation. So the blood vessels actually go the other way, so they soften as well. So you're working the smooth muscles of the blood vessels. And when you get out of the water, again, the blood vessels relax again. There's also something called brown adipose fat tissue, which is a very specific type of fat that human beings are born with naturally. So when humans are born, they have quite a large percentage of brown fat. as we age, we naturally lose that brown fat. The studies, as always, they're not comprehensive, they're not complete, and there is a lot of you have to be honest that there's a lot of controversy around brown fat. Um, but what the studies tend to suggest is that over time, human beings lose this brown adipose fat tissue as we age. So that someone in their pensioner age, over 50, has much less brown fat than someone who's half their age or younger. And the other parts of the study show that if we keep doing cold exposure and have a need to use the brown fat, we can retain the brown fat for longer. So it's suggestive then that the more that we cold dip or expose ourselves to the cold, the more likely we're going to be able to retain the brown adipose fat tissue. And then the follow on from that, and this is where the real controversy is in the science, is a lot of people would say you can't produce new brown fat. Generally, the consensus is once brown adipose fat tissue has gone, um, it's generally considered you can't build new brown fat. But what we can do is we can adapt the white fat that we have into what they call beige fat. So our white fat cells take on the properties of brown adipose fat tissue and create somewhere between the two. Not quite as efficient as brown fat, but better than white. And the difference between those two types of fat is white fat cells tend to be more about insulation, so they're about keeping us warm. They are a fat store. And then brown adipose fat tissue are packed full of mitochondria. So mitochondria, you always hear it, the powerhouse of the cell, burning glucose to produce heat. So brown adipose fat tissue can produce energy. It also has an impact when we go into the cold of helping with our blood sugar levels. So there's implications there for the cold being able to help people who are struggling with diabetes and issues with blood sugar. And that's most of the benefits, I think. But there's huge, and then also, of course, the fact that when we go into the cold, we're choosing to put ourselves in a really uncomfortable situation. I often say that it's not normal, Professor Joyce, to want to dunk ourselves into the cold, but once you have that experience and you really experience getting into a challenging situation, setting your mind to it, and how good you feel afterwards, it works wonders, not just because of the boost in the mood, but also, really doing a practice that feels good for you. It's a challenge. It doesn't get easier. I mean, the reaction to the cold, I find, improves our physical reaction. There's a lot of evidence to suggest our cold shock is halved after six consecutive dips in a short time. But the mindset of it, the difficulty of it's a bit grim out there today. Do I want to do this? I mean, how many people that you dip with have the same conversation every time they're sat on the side of the lake going, "Oh, why do we do this? Are you sure why are we doing this?" Every time.
Every time.
It doesn't go. It doesn't go. But that actually has a really amazing ability, I think, to train into us discipline and train into us to lean into the discomfort. And actually, as I say to people that come to my dipping sessions, we're leaning in. That's one of the catchphrases of the Wim Hof method. It's leaning into the discomfort, finding the comfort in the discomfort, because it's there. It's there. You can find that.
Yeah, you're so right. That conversation does happen almost every time people are standing in winter by the lake or the river or the sea. Why are we doing this? But we know, Joe, we do know, as you said, that it's going to feel amazing. And sometimes, no, most of the time, it feels amazing once we're in and we're doing it. Once we got over that pain,
Yeah.
and the first 30 seconds can be like, wow, why am I doing this? But then you look, I always say, look at the photos of people in cold water. I do have a
Mm,
friend, Elaine, she's listening, who doesn't smile, but she's getting better. But we are laughing. I get quite actually once at Gosfield when it was
yeah.
very icy, there was big blocks of ice
Mm,
cubes in. I
yeah.
uncontrollably laughed. Some of your friends were there, and I literally could not stop laughing. I
Yeah.
felt like I'd gone totally
Yeah.
crazy. But I
Mm,
know when I'm in it, I normally feel amazing once I've got over that 30 seconds. And then I really know that how I feel afterwards will be a total brain reset. And I do have a
yeah.
stupidly self-inflicted, ridiculous life, work life, which
Hmm.
which for me to keep going, for me the cold water swimming is not. It's non-negotiable. I've got to do it, otherwise I will have a burnout
Yeah.
for sure.
Joyce, I hear that, I hear that all the time from people. And the more that this starts to become a practice, the more people lean into it, and the more that, like you say, it becomes non-negotiable. And I think at this time, with the popularity of ice baths and cold dipping, there is an element that people kind of want to come along and experience an ice bath so that they can say they've done an ice bath and then go off on their merry way. And I think that's fine. That's, let people experience life as they want to experience. But I also feel perhaps people are underselling um, themselves with that, because it can become a really beautiful practice over the long term, something that will always be there for you, that will always allow you to get that reset that we need. And you can learn so much about yourself. You learn so much about how you deal with discomfort. You learn about what you are physically and mentally capable of doing. You learn all exactly what you just said, that process of, I know it's going to be crap and I know it's going to be like awful in the first 30 seconds and everything's going to scream at me. And then, you learn to use your breath to calm yourself. And then you get hit by that uncontrollable laugh or the happy smile, and then the energy afterwards. And all of that is beautiful. Like, it's a learning. It's a lesson that applies to many other aspects of your life. And I often say in our workshops that the ice bath and the cold exposure, the cold dipping, it is a metaphor. It is a metaphor for the stress that we face every single day of our lives. Now, the benefit of the ice, as you just said, for your case, is it's a reset. And I'm the same as you. I feel completely reset at the end of an ice bath. But the method of how the body adapts to that idea of it being a hormetic stressor, applies to all of the stressors in our life, because our body can't tell the difference between being cut up in traffic, or having to do a podcast interview if you're stressed about public speaking, or doing a talk at work, a meeting, whatever it may be, a personal issue, just tough discussions in your personal life. Your body cannot perceive any difference between that. It just sees it as differing levels of stress. And doing the ice regularly makes us physically more resilient to stress, but also mentally more resilient to stress. So every time you're resetting yourself, you're also choosing to put yourself in a stressful situation, and the body's adapting to that. And there's such a power in understanding that if you can do this in an ice bath and calm yourself down and remain focused and get out and recover and feel good, then you can do this in other stressful situations. So when you leave that ice bath, you're going to face metaphorical ice baths every day of your life when you leave that workshop. Realistically, there'll be something. For some people, it's driving. If you don't like driving at night, going to an appointment, whatever. But always you have this ability to set your mind and use your breath to calm yourself down. And that's really a very powerful aspect of the ice bath.
And with all those other wonderful ways it makes me feel, I have a very unaddictive personality. So I don't drink tea or coffee. I've even cut out processed sugar now. I hardly drink any
Yeah.
alcohol. I've never really been addicted to anything. I do think I am addicted to cold immersions, but I also think I've become addicted to the sauna.
Oh
What?
yeah, sauna.
Wow. Oh
Yeah.
my God. So I am so pleased that this has really taken off. And a couple of years
Yeah.
ago, I think I told you about this. A couple of years ago, my son and I was at a conference in Oslo and I took one of my sons. It was one of the coldest ever recorded days, -27.
Yeah.
And we did what they all have known about for hundreds of years. Saturday night,
Yeah.
what do they do when it's -27? They go to the sauna and they go and do the cold plunge. Oh
Yeah.
my God. It was, and that I think was a big turning point for me. That was a couple of years ago. And then I was desperate for them to
Mm.
be in England. And then now they are appearing everywhere. And it's so,
Yeah.
so tell us about the sauna and tell us how the breath and the cold and the sauna all work together. To me, paradise.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Um, and interestingly, Joyce, there's a lot of people who come with the mindset on a Thursday, and they're like, "Oh, I just want to do the sauna. I'm not so sure about the ice," and then inevitably they do the ice, and they either love it or they say it's not really for me. Almost always they love it, and even if they don't, then they incorporate some form of cold exposure. So I mentioned we have the two tubs. Even if they don't like the ice, they do the tub with the water in it. Sometimes you get people come along and they say, "I love nature dips." I had someone, she still dips with us every single week. When she first came along, she physically couldn't sit in the sauna for longer than a couple of minutes.
Wow.
If we added any water onto the rocks, she'd be straight out the door. The sauna, again, just like with people approaching the cold, where there's, you get people who are, you mentioned, ingrained in their mind, I'm not a cold person, that I can't think of anything worse, etc., etc. You get the same thing with the sauna. There are feelings of claustrophobia in the sauna, the hotness of it, the difficulty of breathing in some cases. So interestingly, from that experience, she now loves sauna. She's doing a tour of saunas around the country, from someone who is originally absolutely couldn't do the sauna, did not like it on a very, very foundational level, was deeply triggered when in the heat. So it's possible for us to adapt. It does. Just because someone doesn't like one aspect of it, it doesn't mean that it's not for them. I think that this is, provided you're of suitable health, this is something that we all have the ability to explore and enjoy. From the science side of things, from the evidence, the sauna works in a similar way to the ice bath in that it's a hormetic stressor. So we covered that. We have adaptation to the heat in this case rather than the cold. There's a lot of ongoing studies. Again, there's not a huge amount of science, and the science that is there, again, how reliable is it? There still needs to be more. As always, more needs to be done. Um, but there are a couple of studies that are definitely worth sharing. So, for example, one of the best examples that you will see being shared at the moment it was a longitudinal study done in Finland on a population of Finns, um, and they were finding that the optimum basis for a sauna experience was about 19 minutes or more in the sauna, 2 to 3 times a week. And that led to a 24% reduction in all-cause mortality. So death across the board went down just from saunaing two to four times, 2 to 3 times a week. And then when they increased that to 4 to 7 times of sauna, so minimum of 4 times a week, that reduction went up to 40%. So it was a 40% reduction in all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, and so on. And what's really exciting, and what I find a lot of people come to my sessions actually off of the back of, is that they also found that there was a 65% reduction in the risk of developing Alzheimer's or dementia when people were using sauna 4 to 7 times a week. So that's pretty huge. That's pretty incredible, actually. Um, Much like the cold, there is a release of something called human growth factor. So there's a 16% increase in human growth factor, which is um, it allows us to heal our cells. It promotes cell regeneration and from muscle growth and so on. And when coupled with things like exercise, which hopefully as as healthy human beings, we should be incorporating exercise regularly into our lifestyle. But when combined with that, the sauna actually also enhances human growth factor that's produced from the exercise anyway. So it's like a double whammy. So a lot of the studies are showing now sauna after exercise is fantastic for recovery as well. So you've got health benefits and preventative health, as well as if you're looking for improvement in the gym or improvement in your physical ability, you can enhance the training that you always do very simply by incorporating sauna practice. It's quite amazing.
I am tonight doing body attack, body balance, and then a sauna.
Yes, go for it.
I
Yeah,
will. Monday night. I love Monday
that's
night.
so cool.
Right,
Yeah,
now, just two little myths two little questions, fun questions about
yeah,
saunas. So you did say this at the
yeah,
beginning, so I'm going to pick you up. You said cold first, then the sauna. Now,
yeah.
it's a bit like which way round should the toilet paper be? I love doing the sauna first, then the cold, and then when I've done all
Yeah.
my bits, I do the sauna last. So what do you think? Cold plunge first
Mm.
and then sauna, or the other way around?
Okay, I'll tell you what I do,
Yeah.
and then I'll tell you what I actually think. So I am someone, I really enjoy the cold. I really enjoy my ice baths, and I equally enjoy the sauna. But what I have tended to find is once I've had my dose of cold exposure, I'm done. I don't particularly need to do it again. I don't feel like it adds a huge amount of benefit. So my typical process is I go and I do my ice bath as cold as I like it. On a Thursday, that's with plenty of ice, and depending on how I'm feeling that day, I might stay in there for a little bit longer than usual or a little bit less than usual. I then allow myself to warm up gradually. I do some physical movements, very slow and controlled. And then when I'm feeling good, I go into the sauna. I have my usual sauna session. And from there on, I go from the sauna either to watering cans or cold showers to rinse off. Or I'll go, this time of year is actually quite nice. You can go and you can lay down on the grass, just on your back on the cold floor. Especially after the sauna, you can really feel your heartbeat into the ground. It's a very grounding experience. And I rinse and repeat that probably 3 or 4 times. Um, and after that, I don't want to do the ice bath again. So I tend to finish with my sauna, and then I rinse off, get the sweat off, get changed, and and I'll go home. Weirdly, some people absolutely love it the other way. They want to start with the sauna first, do the ice bath. Sometimes they'll go back to the sauna, do the ice bath again, go back to the sauna, finish on an ice bath. So, what is the correct way? And I don't think you'll ever find the perfect answer to it. But from studies, at least, one of the benefits from doing cold exposure is allowing the body to heat up itself. It's called thermogenesis, to produce its own heat to help us warm ourselves up. So that's partly how we become more tolerant to being cold. It also helps our brown fat to be a little bit more um, efficient in how it produces heat, and helps with things like, as I mentioned earlier, the blood sugar levels. So in an ideal world, from a science perspective, you should probably finish with an ice bath. Make sure you do your movements so you're not absolutely freezing cold, and allow your body to warm up without too much artificial heat to get the maximum benefits of the cold. Probably is the textbook way of doing it. But I think any way that gets you out and enjoying being in the cold, any way that gets you out in nature and improving your connection with nature, improving your connection with your own practice, and also improving your connection with the community that you're sharing that space with. Any way of doing that is better than none. And I do think that that's probably the one of the biggest things that people maybe overlook in this is, take for example yourself, Professor Joyce. You're a very avid dipper, and you love to do your saunas, and you do that in different places. You do your dipping in numerous community groups. You've got friends everywhere. And now imagine if that practice was limited to you just doing it in an inflatable tub in your garden every day. I'm not saying that you wouldn't get the benefits from the cold, but there's a lot there that you'd be missing out on. And one of the things that I do see coming up from people is, I get people who have been practicing ice baths regularly at home, and they come to our sessions, and they're kind of like, well, what, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. And it part of it is because they go back to thinking of numbers, and they've gone, right, I'm doing 5 degrees for 5 minutes, I'm doing 6 degrees for 4 minutes, or whatever it is. And they get into their ingrained thing. They want to increase their time, and they're doing it on their own. And eventually, they miss something. There's an aspect of it, they get a lot of benefits from the cold, but they are missing something. And I always ask people to go back to their why. Why are you doing this? Because if you're dipping and you're having a completely miserable time, and at the end you go home and you feel like crap, you've got no energy because you've overdone it, or you feel completely isolated because this is an experience that you're only ever doing on your own, and you're actually longing for connection. Why are you doing it? Why are you doing it? So one of the things that I think is so beneficial about this is the community aspect, the connection. Yes, with the self, as I mentioned. Yes, with the practice. Yes, with nature, but also with like-minded people who you're sharing that space with, having a laugh, learning to play with it, having a good time.
We have the best conversations in the sauna. I took my son to a local sauna a lot over Christmas, and
Yeah.
he said we have the best conversations normally about sourdough and day raving when it's with me. But my last question to you is about the sauna. Well, last question before the final question. The sauna hat. The sauna hat. Everyone says, "What are you
Yeah.
wearing, Joyce? What are you wearing on your head?" And I said, "I'm wearing a sauna hat."
Yeah. They're great things, aren't they?
I love them.
What color is yours?
Oh, I've got a new one that I haven't christened yet. I'm christening tonight. It's purple. I should have brought it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I've got a new
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, no, they're sauna hats. They're absolutely brilliant, and most people have never seen one before. Um, they're up until, I mean, saunas now, it's exploded now, and it's so awesome to see. It's so awesome to see, and like the fact that you can go out and buy a sauna hat is quite amazing, because you couldn't do that a few years ago.
No.
But yeah, they're great. They protect your hair, protect your head. They create a natural insulation around your skull to stop it overheating. You can pull them down to help breathing through the nostrils. A lot of people struggle with burning nostrils when they breathe. You can even soak the hats in water, wear them cold on your head. They're great. They're really, really great. And I definitely recommend, if people start doing sauna regularly, they should invest in a sauna hat. Really protect that head, because ultimately the temperature in that sauna is inhospitable to human life. So protect the head.
It is. It is. I have seen a
Yeah.
fly in a sauna a couple of times. Poor
Yeah.
fly. Although it's not going to
Oh
last long.
no. How long
I
how
know.
long how long was he like?
I know. Not long. Not long.
Oh,
Joe, it's been absolutely fantastic. I've definitely learned some things
I
to take
know.
away that will improve my mental health. Just to finish off with the last, we are going to be the longest podcast I've ever recorded, but I love it. I love it. We've had so much to talk about.
Yes! It's not
You got
about the
to,
numbers, Joyce.
you
It's
got to
not
want
about the
to.
numbers.
But Joe, I ask all my guests, what makes you
Yes.
happy, and where is your happy place? So I can't wait to hear your answer to this.
Mm, what makes me happy? Well, I've got a couple of Irish wolfhounds. They make me very happy.
Oh,
Um, I'm a big animal lover, so I have two very big dogs with two very big hearts, and they always cheer me up and keep me happy when I need it. And my happy place is undoubtedly in an ice bath in a sauna, if that's a possibility. I do both at the same time. Yeah. With my community, yeah, definitely with a strong, loving, supportive community who are just as crazy as you. How can you beat that? That's a happy place.
yeah, I'd agree with that. Now, I know you're not very old, but I ask everyone this, and it's even better when it comes from younger people. What advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, hmm. Gosh, that's a difficult one, isn't it? Um, how do you pick? There's so many mistakes were made. um, I would say I think I think I was very very serious a lot of the time when I was younger, and I think that probably contributed to the burnout that I experienced. Which, I always say I'm glad I went through what I went through. In hindsight, it was very scary um, and awful at the time, but it's led to everything since then, which is just, it's amazing. I appreciate it so much. I'm very grateful, actually. But I would say probably take things less seriously and, yeah, enjoy it a little bit more. Take it take it less seriously.
That's beautiful, and it's a word you said a few times is play. As adults, we need to
Mm,
play, and with everything you've talked
yeah,
about today, and you said fun many times as well. We need to have
mm,
fun, but everything you've talked about is absolutely so brilliant for our mental health that I think
yeah.
people should incorporate and listen to what you've said today into their lives. So, Joe, thank you very much. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you so much, Professor Joyce. It's been lovely to be on here. I wish we could talk for another hour. There's so much to cover.